Arts and Lectures program for 2008-2009. And we are kicking off with It Matters 2008, which is a repeat of what we did in 2004 when we covered process. It was very successful, but the landscape has changed. The players have changed, and we now all pretty much think this is extremely interesting, and by all accounts, I think attracting a lot of younger people too to pay attention to these issues. Now we have, and I hope you've seen this, we have the flyer for this series at the back. It's also on our website, and the issues that were selected by students, just so you're aware of that. Now, I want to draw your attention to a few other things. We do have an art exhibit that's downstairs on the second floor, and that was put together with the help of students from the Gallery and Museum Methods class. So take a look at that if you have a chance. And we have a link on our website to register to vote, and also forms at the back if you're interested in that. Okay, so now, in the interest of time, I'm going to give you just a little bit of insight into our speakers here, and then we'll launch. So today, the issues that we're going to focus on are huge. The war and the economy, all kinds of late-breaking news there. And to speak on these issues, we have Dr. Steve Cuellar from the Department of Economics in the School of Business and Economics, and Paul Gullixson from Editorial Director at the Press Democrat. And our moderator is David McCuan, Professor in the Department of Political Science. So, David, take it away.
All right. Thank you all for coming today. This is the first of what we hope will be another successful series on issues before the electorate for the election. Again, let me reiterate some of the things that the Dean mentioned. First, you can find out about the It Matters series and upcoming events at the library website, library.sonoma.edu. Right on the front of that page, there's a big thing that says It Matters, and you can click right on it, and you'll see the upcoming series that we have and different events coming up, including the art gallery opening lecture and show on the 25th of September, which should be a lot of fun. So we'd like to invite you all to that as well. We also, this season, this series, are working with the League of Women Voters for Sonoma County and registering voters and involved in voter registration efforts and working with the Sonoma County Registrar of Voters, Janice Atkinson. So those of you that are here that aren't registered to vote, want to change your registration from one county to another, the League will be here and we'll have that capability to do that after the program. We'll try to end as close to 1 o'clock as we can today. What we'll do is we'll begin with the editorial director of the Press Democrat, Paul Gullixson. Paul will talk for a little bit, and then we'll go to Steve Cuellar, professor of economics, or in the Department of Economics in the School of Business and Economics. And then we'll go to Q&A. What I'll try to do during the question and answers is repeat the questions so that everyone can hear them. We'll see how that goes. We want to encourage as much interactivity and as much give and take in the Q&A as possible. That's how these forums work best, and we really want to encourage you to participate and scream loudly and ask tough questions, especially since I'm the moderator and I don't have to take them. Then that's what we'll do. That's the plan for today. Looking at some of the upcoming lectures, you can see that we're going to look at oil and energy next week, then the environment. We take a break on the 8th. We're going to have a pre-ballot discussion. Students in my campaigns and elections class are going to be presenting about the ballot measures, not the pros and cons, but who's behind them, how the money flows, the unintended consequence, this type of thing. Then we'll do race and gender, immigration, and then we'll have a post-election forum, which is always raucous and always a lot of fun. So you want to be sure and come to that regardless of what happens. Let me just start by saying that this is the first week in this electoral season where the economy has become the #1 issue in all national polls. The economy and the war, other issues such as health care, have been battling with each other for the top 5 in terms of attention amongst all voters. But this is the first week, beginning on Monday, that all the polls have consistently shown that the economy is uppermost in the minds of voters. Those of us in political science who predict elections, like we predicted Gore would win in 2000, like we predicted that Kerry would win in 2004, always think that the economy matters more than just about anything else. So I suppose that today's talk will probably focus more on the economy than the war. The job then of the audience is, if we're not doing what you think is fair justice to the other topic about the war, to challenge us and to prompt questions in that regard. And with that introduction, let me turn it over to Paul Gullixson, Editorial Director of the Press Democrat.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Barbara, for inviting me here today to be a part of this kickoff of this series. This is a terrific series, and we appreciate you bringing that attention to this. I can't imagine a better subject to start with than war and economy. When I was first invited to this, I thought we were going to talk about the war, but we're going to talk about the economy, because that's what everybody's talking about. We were promised an election of change, and what has really changed is what this election is all about. As David mentioned, that is the single issue on the minds of voters. Poll after poll is showing that. 8 out of 10 people think we're going in the wrong direction. But they're not always in agreement about who is going to be the best person to drive that change, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. My personal experience, I oversee our editorial pages for the Press Democrat. I monitor all the letters that come in, all the opinion pieces, and it's remarkable the letters about the Iraq War have dried up. It's all about the economy. It's all about Sarah Palin, who we'd never heard of 3 weeks ago. Now that's what's dominating our pages. And so I'm interested in hearing really what you want to talk about. I'm interested in talking about election, local, national, state, economy, state, national, whatever you're interested in. I'm open for that. But I'm mainly going to direct my initial comments about war and economy in the context of this presidential election. And that is changing every day. What we've seen the last few days with our markets in upheaval, we've seen a massive expansion of the role of the federal government into financial markets. It's unprecedented, and we are in uncharted territory here. And the impact it's going to have in a presidential election is still is pretty much up in the air. If you look back in the total amount of committed in terms of the bailout of Bear Stearns, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and now AIG, equals $315 billion. That's about half what has been invested so far at the end of this year, at least in the war in Iraq. The big questions coming up, well, of course, are going to be, is it going to end here? How many companies are too big to fail? And more than anything else, what is going to be the exit strategy from this? Our federal government is now in some very odd areas of business. 3 weeks ago, it entered the mortgage business. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac oversee more than half the mortgages in this country. And now we're pretty much in control of those. As of yesterday, we're now in the insurance business. One of the things the federal government now is the primary controller of a company who's one of the leading provider of insurance for kidnapping and ransom. I mean, that's the weirdest. I mean, what do we make of that? I mean, it's just this is uncharted territory. In the context of so as I say, the big question I think for the presidential candidates in particular is how are they going to deal with this? Particularly John McCain has pledged to balance the budget by the end of his first term. He hasn't really adjusted that. How is that going to manifest itself in this race? But so far, this has really been an evolving thing. I think when the history is written about this period, it's really going to be very remarkable. It's going to be fascinating because first we saw a first-term senator armed with a little more than eloquence and some fresh ideas topple a Clinton machine, it's been called, that seemed unstoppable. We saw John McCain, whose campaign was down to its last dollar, and he wasn't very well liked even in his own party, and who staked his career on something called the surge, which nobody wanted at the time, and now he came back to claim the Republican nomination. And now we've probably seen the biggest change of all, which is that shift away from discussion. We thought this election was going to be about the war and about change and maybe a little about the environment. It's now all about the economy. And frankly, what that comes down to is it's right now it's looking like it's favoring McCain. And if I never thought I'd say this, and David's going to disagree with me, and this will start off our discussion today, but I would say that if the election were held today, John McCain would win. And here's why. One, voters trust, at least the initial polls are showing, that voters trust McCain to deal with the economic crisis more than they do Obama. Okay, for all the questions we want about change, the perception is McCain is judgment can be trusted more. What's remarkable is public perceptions of McCain's judgment dealing with the war have changed as well. Back in April, voters backed Obama's judgment on Iraq 54% to 34%. That's a 20-point gap there. As of yesterday, Newsweek just came out with this new revised poll that shows now people support McCain's judgment over Obama's 51 to 44%. And here's the last issue comes down to a woman named Sarah Palin. Like I said, we never heard of three weeks ago. A lot of the nation is sort of shaking their heads, saying, how did this person come from a city mayor of a small town just several years ago to being on the verge of becoming vice president? And the reality is, from McCain's perspective, from Republican, it was a brilliant pick. And I'll tell you why. They didn't choose Sarah Palin because they were hoping to win the votes of California college students. They want to win the votes of people my age in Ohio, and Michigan, and maybe even Pennsylvania. And that's what's going to determine this election. And so and right now, can I take this over here? I just want to show you one thing. Is this transportable?
We'll find out. Just yell louder.
Here, I'll take this off. Excuse me.
Try Alt Tab.
Sorry. There we go. Okay. I don't know if you can even see that very well, but this red, I don't have a pointer here. This red number is basically McCain's poll number. This is from a website called Real Clear Politics, and what it does is it takes all the poll numbers it gets and combines them all into trying to understand what it's all meaning, where it all, and there's a number of sites that do this, but I find this to be one of the most helpful. This red number indicates McCain's poll number. That blue number represents Obama's number. Right here is right about here is right around the California presidential primary. Now remember, at this point, Obama's going head-to-head with Hillary. So a lot of people are unsure about whether they prefer Obama to Clinton. Okay, so right about here is where Obama makes his separation from Hillary and wins the nomination. Here's and so during the summer, there's a pretty big healthy gap. Right here is the conventions. There's a big spike for Obama. McCain's down here. In about a week, it turns around. And now you'll see McCain is actually ahead of Obama. And a lot of that spike you can call the Palin spike, because she has a huge attraction level for a huge demographic, and David will talk about this, but white, female, Rust Belt, women voters. She's got a huge appeal to them. They don't vote for her. They're not attracted to her because she's brilliant on foreign policies. They're attracted to her because she's one of them. And that's where this election is going to be won. And it's going to be won in states like Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania. And
and that's where the reality is. And so the question will be, will that Palin bubble burst? So I'll leave on that note.
All right. Let's hear from our thanks. Let's hear from our second panelist, Steve Cuellar. Professor Cuellar.
Yes. I guess I'm here to talk about the economy and the war. The effects of the war, I'll have to rephrase our It Matters motto here, but I would say that initially the effects of the war are that it doesn't matter. The effects of the war on the economy aren't going to have that big of an effect. There's deficit spending, there's increasing debt, but we've seen in the past that neither of those have that big of an effect at the current economy. Those may have effects down the line. And we read about and we see panelists talk about the cost of the war, $300 million a day, $400 million a day, and what we could have bought with those funds. But the reality is most of those things weren't going to be purchased anyways, irrespective of the war. The fact that we could have fed all of Darfur with $300 million is irrelevant because we were never going to feed all of Darfur with that money in the first place, irrespective of the war. So when you hear panelists talk about those, I see it as somewhat disingenuous. It's not a real comparison. It was never going to happen before the war. It's not going to happen after the war. The long-term effects of the war are going to be the deficit and the debt, and those things have effects through interest rates, which we really aren't seeing now. They have an effect through exchange rates, which we have seen now. But overall, and there is an entire school of thought among macroeconomists that would say that deficits and debts just don't matter at all. And there's macroeconomists that would debate over that, and they could tell you one way or another, but we haven't seen much of an effect of deficits or debt on the economy. The bigger picture, as a labor economist, which is what I do, the bigger picture has to do with working people. How are working people doing throughout the country? And for that, I did bring a picture, and I'm going to have to do what we just did and move over here. Economist without graphs isn't a true economist, I guess. You gotta have a graph somewhere. So, where am I? I'm going to show you a couple of things that I would say, well, don't matter. There's the deficit. And you can see, I put a line at 2001, and you can see where the deficit has increased. You can also see the previous spike in the deficit was probably was World War II. It was World War II. And then we see some other downward drifting, increasing deficits over time. Again, the deficit has GDP, the debt, which was on an upward trend in the first place, the debt as a percentage of GDP. Again, my argument here would be most of this doesn't really matter all that much in terms of macroeconomics. In terms of the lives of you and I, none of this is really going to have much of an effect. It's going to have a legacy effect over time, but even then, the effects might be minimal. I would say the overriding issue in the economy, in the United States, and in fact worldwide, has to do with wage inequality. And the picture I'm going to show you next has to do with my own research that I've done. And this is the picture I was able to come up with. This is a picture of U.S. wage inequality from 1962 to 2006, which is when we have the current data. And these are wage earning men in wage earners. In other words, this doesn't include the CEOs earning stock options and $1 million salaries. These are people that actually go to work every day and earn their wages. And the picture you see starting from about, well, prior to 1980, you can see kind of the rising tide lifts all boats kind of argument. The economy moves, is rising, all three segments of the economy are rising. And the segments I looked at, that I broke it down by, are the 10th percentile, the 50th percentile, which is the median, and then the 90th percentile. So what I wanted to look at was how are the low wage earners, the upper wage earners, and the average person doing. Up until about 1980, we see everyone moving together. But then we see this divergence in low wage earners' wages and high wage earners' wages. The median worker is somewhat treading water. The median worker hasn't had a raise, it looks like, today that they're making about what they were in 1972. In real wages, this is inflation-adjusted wages, versus the bottom 10% of earners who are earning, it looks like about 90% of what that same worker was earning in 1962. A low-skilled or low-wage earner today is making less than a similar low-wage worker in 1962. That is a fairly big deal. Now the flip side of that, the flip side of wage inequality, which isn't necessarily bad, is high wage earners are actually seeing their wages increase. And we see their wages increasing somewhat dramatically. That is, you can see workers 90th percentile, measured at the 90th percentile, making about 160% of what they earned in 1962. That's pretty good. Now, the other picture I want to show you, and that is a pretty drastic picture. That shocked me when I first saw it, and I made it. So, the other picture is, look at high school, college wage differential. Since we're at college, that probably makes a difference here. And you can see that you see similar patterns in wage inequality, except it starts a little bit later. In about the mid-90s, you see the college premium rise, and the high school wages are pretty much meandering at zero. So we're seeing a similar effect when we break it down by college and high school graduates. Now, being in California, I wanted to see, well, how does California look versus the rest of the country? Well, California is the center of high tech. Our wage inequality is worse than that of, well, it's as bad as the country as a whole. But this is the college-high school premium. And in that sense, the college-high school premium in California is greater, the differential is greater than it is in the U.S. as a whole. But that makes sense. It makes sense, and this is the last one I want to show you. Otherwise, I'll be up here all night, and then I'll break out a piece of chalk or something. I know you don't want to do that. But as I said, this is the overriding concern, I think, in the economy today is wage inequality. And the way I explain it, and this is something I cover in my labor class, is that we're just seeing a rise in return to skilled workers. The economy has moved from an economy based in manufacturing where you can graduate high school, get a job, raise a family, send your kids off to college, to an economy where you really need to acquire skills, and if you don't acquire those skills, you're penalized, and you're penalized every year, successively. Every year we see low-skilled workers, measured by high school, making less than they did previous generations. But we also see high-skilled workers, at least here measured in terms of college graduates, see their earnings increase. And that wage diversity, that inequality, is what's driving pretty much everything. If you look at the economy as a whole, look at where we see a booming economy, especially right now during a recession. Walmart's still doing well. We're going to see lots of people buying there. And you also see things like Neiman Marcus still doing fairly well, even though we're in the middle of a recession. What you don't see doing well are those kind of middle grouped, those middle American wage earners targeted retail outlets.
Walmart.
Well, Walmart's, yeah, but Target, Penny's, Mervyn's, even Macy's, kind of the middle tier are taking the hit. Why? Because people who see their wages earning are moving up to Neiman Marcus and Saks and Nordstrom's, and people whose wages are falling are moving to Walmart and secondhand stores. So this wage inequality is what I would say is the overriding factor in not just the economy, but also the elections. Because these people are going to vote probably very differently. And this has been happening for a while, and I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. People always say, well, shouldn't we stop it? Well, I would ask the students in here, do you want to see this trend discontinue? What does it mean for the students? It means that if you get a degree, acquire some skills, you'll be rewarded. And that's good. I mean, that's good for especially at a university, that's good to know. The opposite is if you fail to do that, you're going to be penalized. So is inequality good or bad? I'm not sure, but that's the reality of the economy. I think it's going to be a big issue in the elections. I know it was a big issue for John Edwards, and I know that Bill Clinton mentioned it as, I think the single most important factor was he talked about wage inequality. So I think it's going to be a big factor. It's always a big factor. And these, again, I want to reiterate, these aren't your CEOs earning millions of dollars in stock options, and these are actual wage earners. These are people that the top, in the previous picture, the top 10%, the 90th percentile, was only about $40 an hour. The bottom 10% was about $10 an hour, and then that median I think was around $20, and those were all the current 2006 data. So we're not talking about the big CEOs and the big wage earners. We're talking about working men and women. And if we included the big CEOs, this would obviously be somewhat different. But to kind of put things into perspective, since that's a pretty small segment of the economy, are those CEOs earning the millions of dollars, this gives us more of a realistic look of kind of what all of us can face. Now, I'm sure some of us want to be the big CEOs, but for most of us, we're going to end up in this sample of the data. So I top coded the data. I didn't look at the super high income earners, and I looked at mostly wage earners, people that actually went to work every day. So that would be my take on the economy. The war, I have kind of a less of a imposing effect. So.
All right, to set up the Q&A, I'd like to put forward three things. First, why have the death tolls come off the front pages? 4,100 service members killed in Iraq, 520 plus in Afghanistan, and you should think about that and what's happened, let alone civilian casualties, costs, and so forth. And this election has really kind of moved the death tolls off the front pages, been replaced by the economy, and really only matters for 5 battleground states: Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, Ohio, and then that player to be named later. And that player to be named later might be Missouri, in some cases Missouri, it might be New Mexico, it might be another state like Virginia or Colorado. Those seem to be the only states that matter. And then there's, if I could return to a little bit to what Paul started us off with, there seems to be a base at which McCain seems to be able to retain. Larry Bartels, who's one of the brightest political scientists in the country at Princeton University, Larry's written a paper that says, in bad economic times, the incumbent party seems to have a floor or basement of around 44 to 45%. Meaning if McCain gets 46, 48%, he's only doing a point or two better than the floor. What that portends for the election, which is, 42 days from now, is that the race is going to be close until the end, because the base for the Democratic out party is 41 or 42, which means Obama has to get crossover voters at some level, probably white working class voters, which presents some problems for him and has consistently in the election. So with those kind of three caveats, let's open it up to questions that you may have for the panelists. Hi.
Hi. If this wage inequality issue is so crucial, as I believe it is, and one would think that would play to the Democrats' strength, is it all personality that is, or gender that is allowing Palin to have the success she's having among this group in the Rust Belt that you pointed to?
Let me repeat the question. The question is, if this wage inequality data that Professor Cuellar has showed us is true and it matters, that should advantage the Democrats. And is there something else going on here that has helped Palin, McCain, that seems to, if you will, kind of retard or hold back the effect? Fair enough? Paul?
Well, is this on? Maybe I turn it on.
Sure, just yell.
Okay. Well, I guess the unfortunately, these are very real figures that we all should be concerned about. The big question is, how much are they going to weigh in voters' minds? How much is the dissatisfaction so great that it will drive them, a certain faction of
the blue liners and the red liners to the polls to ask for change and what change is being promised that will be the driving force. The problem is the green represents all the donors on both sides, and so Steve is right that Edwards is really the only one who was talking about this issue, and he was being criticized as a populist for it. Okay, so now in terms of Palin, Palin's attraction to those on the lower end of that chart really have more to do with social issues than economic ones. I mean, they're voting. Palin represents to them somebody who reflects their values, and we can argue all day long about those values, what those values are. I'm still not sure what those values are, but she represents them, and that's the perception. And so there's a something called cognitive dissonance, right? The idea that you can entertain and believe two conflicting ideas simultaneously, right? So you ask people, who would you like in charge of the White House? 47%, 41% say Democrats. You ask them, who do you think, do you want change? Yes. Who do you think is better at bringing about change? Obama, 48% to 40%. Who are you going to vote for? I don't know. 46%, 46%. I mean, 8% undecided right now. I mean, it's a dead heat. We've had two incredibly close presidential elections, and right now, we're probably headed for another one, and we're looking, as we say, we're talking about Ohio. So, anyway, I wish people would actually sit down and look at these kinds of charts, but I'm not sure that always happens.
Steve, you want to take a stab at this before we move to another question?
Yeah, I would say the one person that ran on this platform, and his whole platform was the two Americas, the rich and the poor, is sitting on the sideline. So, but I don't think it was because people didn't care about it. I think it's because he wasn't the first black or first woman to run as president. So I just think he got caught between a rock and a hard place in history. And his issue, I think, resonates with everyone. He just happened to go up against two people that were more popular at the time.
Perry?
Well, that's what puzzles me. It seems like those folks at the bottom are going to be voting against their own interests economically if they're voting for McCain. And so is it the fact that the economic issue, the social issues outweigh the economic issues in this election so much that a person will vote against their economic best interest for McCain? Because that seems to me what your data shows is going to have to happen if McCain wins.
The question was, why is it that people seem to pay better attention, or why do the social issues seem to motivate voters, especially in the lower strata, at a higher rate in terms of their voting decision than the fact that they're being economically disadvantaged or left behind? Why does the concern that they can't pay their mortgage less important than the fact that their neighbors who are the same sex want to get married, for example? Okay. Steve, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I think it's when we saw Hillary Clinton doing shots at the bar, when we saw Al Gore doing the same thing, it was that who would you rather have a drink with, and that is that's the strategy, the direction that these elections take. It's who would you rather have a drink with. John Kerry windsurfing was just a killer.
I have that commercial if you want to see it.
John Kerry windsurfing was a killer. Nobody in that bottom 10% or these high school wage earners are going to vote for a windsurfing, Harvard-educated person. And unfortunately, you're right. Do the policies of one party favor the lower end to the other? Perhaps, probably, but it really comes down to who would you rather have a beer with. That's why Hillary was there downing shots at the bar, And Obama made a problem, had a problem with something. I don't remember what it was, but it was bowling. That's right. It was the bowling thing, where he couldn't bowl, and those things matter.
Paul, take a stab at the Bubba vote.
It does come down to who would you rather drink a beer with. That's how George Bush won, if you remember 8 years ago. He didn't win on experience. I mean, his previous experience, he was a short-term governor. It's very similar to Palin, for that matter. It's a bigger state, population-wise. But prior to that, his only experience was running a baseball team. And he cast himself as an outsider, although he's the son of a president. So I don't know. People don't really go. The issue of voting against your own self-interest, it does come down to perception of what is the role of government. If the perception is that government is not going to be there to help me on my financial issues, or shouldn't be, but they can be there to help me on my social issues, then they'll vote them. And that's the perception among many. But although the odd thing is, we're talking about the Rust Belt, right? I mean, we see more foreclosures in that area of the country than anywhere else. I mean, it's remarkable what is happening in the Cleveland area. Steve and I were talking earlier. I was reading a story about how one of the biggest distributors of mortgages in the one neighborhood of Cleveland was a hot dog vendor. He was talking people, and he was brokering loans right and left, trying to talk people into these loans. And those loans were then acquired by other companies. They became those mortgage-backed securities that AIG would acquire. And now we're bailing out the federal government, but who's bailing out the people who lost those homes? So and now everybody's fighting. Well, we should have had more regulation. Okay, great. Where were you? Anyway.
All right, Karen?
So following up on that, what you just said that people feel like the government can't help with their social issues, and maybe it's not the place to be helping financial issues. Are we going to see a change in that mentality because of what's going on in the past couple of days?
The question was, are we going to see a change in perhaps the calculus between the weight of social issues versus the weight of economic issues, for example?
The government having to have
Sure.
responsibility for social issues. For economic issues.
Sure. It seems that whichever party is going to win is going to be more activist in its orientation to intervention. Right? Paul?
Well, I was mainly talking in the context of really philosophical differences between big government versus small government, which supposedly still separates Republicans and Democrats, although we've seen the most massive expansion of government just in the last week than we've probably seen in some random time. And that's and whoever wins this election is going to inherit that. So there is a discrepancy there.
Steve? You want to know?
I think it's too confusing. I think being an informed voter is more difficult than being an uninformed voter. That's why I relate to the guy drinking beer and not windsurfing versus the guy
It's too
windsurfing.
complicated.
It just takes too much effort. I got to go to work. I got to come home. I got to, feed the kids, mow the lawn. When do I have time to watch NPR or listen to NPR or read the New Yorker or whatever else? When do I have time to become informed of these things? For a lot of people, they do. But for a big chunk of people, they don't, and that's why you'd rather be, doing shots at a bar than debating economic issues, because one has a higher payoff than the other.
Well, I wonder to what extent is the general public informed about the economy, informed about the war, and how do you both see the possibilities of both the press and academia in kind of doing more, stepping up more? Because my impression is that the public often doesn't understand the issues, and the war is very complex. It's a very complex region. So what can the press do more, and what can academia do more to kind of help the public understand the details here?
The question was, what can the press do better and more of, and what can academics do more and a better job with in terms of educating the public and improving the level of understanding about some of these complex issues? So let's pick on the reporter first.
Well, I don't need to tell you, it's sort of a perfect storm for newspapers right now. There are not going to be more reporters covering this election. In fact, there have been op-eds written about how there are fewer reporters because of what's happening in the newspaper industry. When I say a perfect storm, I'll just talk about my economy for a minute, but what's happening right now with our economy is really taking a tough time on newspapers. I mean, it's not only the internet transition, the loss of, if you want to sell a boat now, you go on Craigslist. You don't call the Press Democrat. I mean, I'm not suggesting there's still some value to the Press Democrat, but the reality is, if you're trying to find a roommate or a job, that's where you go. We were dealing with that reality. Now we're dealing with the reality of real estate ads going away. Now we're dealing with the reality of nobody wants to buy a car. So why should auto dealers put an ad in the paper? Those are the retail drop really kills our advertising, which drives 80% of our income. Subscriptions are 20%. So that's why every day you're opening the paper and you're seeing LA Times laying off more people, McClatchy laying off more people. It's a tough area out there. However, that said, there is plenty of opportunities to find out information about what is going on with our economy and with our, probably more than ever, with the war, because of the internet, what's happening on the internet. I mean, it's remarkable, and that's why my industry is changing. The printed word is changing. How we deliver that information is changing. Our role in the community is changing. But that doesn't diminish the ability for people to find information. What is still a challenge is people need to go out and find the information to educate themselves. They're not going to be suddenly banging on your door saying you need to learn about this. The question is, has there been a fundamental shift in the public's desire to inform themselves on certain issues? And that, I think, is a good discussion point.
So, Steve, what can we do better to make your data more palatable and digestible, I guess?
Well, we've got 24-hour news channels. We've got CNN, we've got MSNBC, which is all politics almost, CNN, Fox News. We've got the Drudge Report online. We've got the Huffington Post online. I mean, there's plenty of opportunities for information. I think the problem comes back to what I mentioned earlier, what I think in political science they call rational ignorance. It's rational for me to be ignorant on the issues. And there's easier ways to determine my vote, and those easier ways are who you relate to most easily. So,
let me get in the back, and then we'll come up and over. Yes. All right, so the question is related to why the war has left the front pages and why the war is less covered. Are we less interested? Does the press have less access? Why has attention to the war been lost due to, for example, the economy, as an example, especially since it was just a short while ago that the war was front and center, especially on TV? Okay? Steve, let's start with you.
As an economist, I guess the only thing I could say is I really don't know about the access to the war. I know the Bush administration has prevented coffins from being filmed coming in. But in terms of kind of a market economy, the reason I'm not showing more of the war is because the ratings were down when I showed the war. So it's really profit driven. If you had some sort of reality show maybe, or somehow to make it more interesting, maybe people would become, maybe more people would watch it, but it's pure ratings is what I would say.
Paul?
Well, I think it's a good question. I mean, General Petraeus stepped down from command of the troops in Baghdad yesterday, and it barely made any coverage anywhere. I mean, it was a huge transition of authority. Part of that is a result of I mean, it's been very successful. I mean, he's violence is down. It's been there's been a lot of successes there. Have the problems shifted now to Afghanistan? Yeah, it certainly would appear that way. The coverage is still there. We're still running body counts. We still do that. You know, from my perspective, like as I said, the letters about the war have just basically gone away. I mean, people aren't. It's not huge. It's certainly part of the dialogue in this presidential election, but it's not. It's been supplanted by the concerns about the economy, foreclosures, you know, jobs, takeovers, all these kinds of things. And there again, there is a lot of coverage of that. I grew up, did the same thing, Vietnam. But you know, there's also a wider, broader investment of the public in that war as well as World War II in terms of their involvement. It was a constant, you know, part of the distribution here is that more of the people on the blue lines, families from the blue lines, are the ones who really have the investment in this, personal investment in this war. Is that part of the reason we're not as committed? Maybe. I don't know. But we still do that, and if we drop our numbers or don't run them, we hear about it.
Plus the draft, I think, makes a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
The threat of the draft.
Let's go all the way to the back.
My question revolves around labor unions. Do you find a correlation in wage differential with diminishing membership in labor unions? And two, do labor unions matter in electoral politics anymore? And three, do you think if there were an increase in labor unions, would people vote more for their interests and would the wage differential gap grow?
Yeah.
Steve, you take all three, and then we'll go to another question.
I have one.
Yeah, the first one I can address directly in that union membership peaked in the 40s, I think, and has been falling ever since then. So union membership was falling well before wage inequality started to change. So we didn't find any correlation between union membership and wage inequality. The other ones are more political questions. So I know you had something.
Oh, I was just going to say, at the local level that we're seeing right now, public employees unions, the role is a huge issue in this election. In fact, it may be the central issue because of concerns about cutbacks, rollbacks, freezes in contracts. Sonoma County is got a $450 million unfunded liability with retirement benefits. They're trying to roll that back. The unions are resisting. It's the central issue. Unions are, they have their slate of candidates at most of these elections. So very much at the local level, unions are right there, but their role is diminished largely to the public employees unions, are where they exist anymore.
How it shifted is that unions and corporations are more important for issue advocacy, which is largely unregulated, soft money. So all the focus for regulation, for political regulation and campaign finance dollars is largely focused on candidates. We don't do business that way anymore. You do it through big dollar ballot measure campaigns, big dollar issue campaigns, Swift Vote Veterans for Truth, MoveOn.org, and so forth. It's movement generated, which helps interest groups. That's how unions have a role, and that's how corporations or other interested parties have a role. So that's that. So it's the soft money issue advocacy, independent expenditures that we see at the local level, for example, that have a huge effect here. Yes, sir.
I was always taught if you're unskilled or uneducated, you're going to be unemployed in the future. But looking at this chart, if you're skilled and educated, it looks like you've done pretty good since 1995. Am I looking at this correctly?
You've done extremely well.
Yeah, so that's pretty optimistic.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunities out here for people who are willing to work, to get an education, or to acquire a skill that's needed in the...
I say that every day in my classes. I tell them.
But if you're in the bottom, the blue, you don't want to get a high school education, you don't want to work, you don't.
It's a college, yeah. No, I say that also. I say that also. Acquire skills, be rewarded, don't be penalized.
So I'm just looking at, what do I want from government? I just want the ability to, work and to get an education and a skill. That's all I ask. So why do I need something social? Why should they take away from the green give to the blue.
Well, presumably, we're going to help raise education, for example. I mean, look at the California budget. If we get a 12.5% cap, which is the current budget that the governor's going to veto on Friday, there's a 12.5% slush fund. That's a 12.5% cap on a budget that has discretion that's totaling about 6 to 8%. It's effectively doubling and creating a double cap, which affects the ability of folks that are blue to get to green, or I'm sorry, to get to red, to think about being green. Because when you ask people who are blue, if they're blue, they're not blue. They're red, and they're green. That's part of the lack of understanding that when you ask people what income they are, nobody's low income. Nobody's unskilled. They all think they have the potential to reach that. And so if we go to budget games like this or different influences on politics that don't allow or exacerbate wage inequality, there's going to be great social pressure, which is going to, the argument would be, spill over to politics and change the transaction costs and affect whether people can read the newspaper, let alone buy the newspaper. Joey?
I was wondering if the panel might comment briefly on the national and newspaper and also electoral interest in war and the economy might be catastrophe driven. That if there's another giant battle in Fallujah, the war will be on the front page, and if the Dow drops 500 points in a day, that would move the economy to the front. So people are going to vote for free newspapers about whichever one's going badly. If they're both going well, then people don't care about those issues.
Okay. So Joey's fantastic question. He's in my class. Joey's fantastic question is, to what degree is the electoral attention cycle driven by crisis or catastrophe? The degree to which the Dow is falling, the degree to which a large battle in, for example, Fallujah, might put the war back on the front page and might alter the mix here in the election.
I think that a bad hair day for Sarah Palin would be a bigger story.
Paul?
I don't know, a bad hair day, but absolutely it's catastrophe driven. I mean, whether it's hurricane, whether it's a hurricane, we've had a couple, or if something breaks out in Fallujah, absolutely. That's what we are, a catastrophe driven, infotained public. We gravitate to catastrophe, and it could be a natural one or it could be man-made. If Obama says you can't put lipstick on a pig, that is a catastrophe, and we gravitate toward that. That is very much. I would say that's a very true thing.
We have this woman right here. Yes, ma'am.
My nephew just graduated from San Diego State University in finance, so his timing wasn't very good. But anyway, he recently invited me to join Facebook, and I did that. And I've gotten access now to all kinds of younger generation folks and seeing what they're doing. And many of them are checking out a club or a group called Who the Blank is Sarah Palin. And so I thought that was kind of interesting, although I'm not sure any of them are actually voting. About this. But my question is, I thought that Obama was kind of brought to the top by a lot of younger generation people getting involved, and that put him over Clinton. I'm not sure, number one, if that's true. I'd like to find out. And number two, if that is the case, are they not a factor? This is all now, white soccer moms, Rust Belt moms that are going to drive it. So.
Do we need the question repeated? No? Okay. Okay, so 6 months ago, it was young voters voting overwhelmingly for Obama, and we know from election after election they don't stick around for the general election. They haven't. They've been voting in larger numbers, that's true, and they're largely momentum-driven voters. The same thing's true for Latinos, that we've been waiting to show up in national polls since '96, since kind of the 187, 209 days in California. They haven't shown up nationally. The same thing with African Americans, who have been registering and have been participating in record numbers, but because of the concentration factor of where they're located, essentially get washed out by white votes. You'd be looking at an Obama wave, a Democratic wave, if young voters, Latino voters, and African Americans came to some huge kind of momentum of registering and staying in the electorate. And that hasn't happened. Because where you see the effect greatest would be in states like Indiana or Pennsylvania, which are states that also have a difficulty with the legacy of racism and voter suppression. If the race is close between now and November 4th, negative ads will go up and voter suppression methods will go up. And so what you do is you try to retard new voters. You try to hold them back as much as possible. That hurts the rock star and helps accelerate the in-party at least a little bit, especially if the in-party can turn and talk about reform. It makes McCain more viable.
I just want to dovetail that it doesn't take a lot to discourage people to vote. I mean, rain on election day can influence an outcome. And people talk about how close the election was in 2000. Well, it was just as close in 2004. If a population half the size of Santa Rosa changes vote in Ohio, it would be a different president the last 4 years. So if somebody says my vote doesn't matter, it drives me nuts. I mean, because not only at the local level, but at the national level, you can see change.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious if you have an opinion on how the foreclosure crisis and having people registered at certain addresses, which possibly they don't reside in anymore, is going to cause a crisis at the polling place.
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Okay, so there's a great piece in the current New York Review of Books written by Andrew Hacker, Hacker, I believe it is, where he discusses the Marion County, Indiana ruling by the court about requirements for ID and proof of residency for voters. And what you would find, what you have found is that there are higher residency requirements and greater identification requirements in most of the targeted states in the election. About not just the 5 battlegrounds, but about 20 particular states, which seem to have, if you will, emerging voter populations, not stagnant or always present voter populations, the traditional voter, but emerging voter populations. And that could play a huge role. When you lay foreclosure maps on top of blue and red states, or states that are not blue and red but are purple in targets, lo and behold, they seem to dovetail with each other almost exactly. So it could be a huge potential problem. And that portrays 2 scenarios, either what Paul's talked about in terms of having a close election in 2000, 2004, or reverse party effect, same thing. McCain gets more popular vote. The Obama people are concerned with only one thing, the Electoral College vote, and they get more Electoral College votes. We could see a reverse of 2000. Secretaries of State matter. Voter registration rules matter more than emerging voter populations is the shorthand answer. Yes, sir, in the Red's hat.
Senator McCain runs on a platform that he's going to change what's happened for the past 8 years under Bush administration. Is there anything in his economic plan that truly differs, major issues, from what has happened in Bush years?
So the question is, how does McCain's economic platform differ dramatically from what's happened in the last 8 years? One of you?
Well,
I didn't know he had an economic platform, so, but neither one of them really do. I mean, and he's also kind of said that the economy is fundamentally strong. I think is his code phrase or whatever it is.
The fundamentals remain strong.
Fundamentals remain strong, so that's not necessarily changed. But I don't know if Obama's been a whole lot more detailed in his economic platform either. So,
Paul?
Well, he has pledged to cut the corporate tax rate. He has pledged to balance the budget. I'm not sure how he achieves that. He has pledged a gas tax holiday. He still stands by that, which is terrible pandering. Hillary got beat up for that, and McCain deserves to still get beat up for that. He's pledged a crisis commission to go look and see how we got into this problem. Okay, thank you. So it's Obama actually has a longer economic platform. Whether we have the resource, I mean, he's talking about investing $25 billion to job development. He's talking about $1,000 tax cut rebate for middle class families, an additional tax cut for middle class. I mean, he actually has a lot of detail. The question is whether we have the resources to do a lot of these things that he's pledging.
We'll take one more question. There's one out there. If not, Okay, let me remind you that the next forum is on the 24th, followed by Wednesday, September 24th at noon about oil and energy. The first presidential debate is 2 days later on the 26th. Absentee voters, ballots, thank you, go out in the mail, let's see, on October 6th, 19 days from now. So election begins early and often, in less than 20 days. If you need to register to vote, we'll be happy to take care of you in the back. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much.
Nice coming.
That's great.
Thanks for coming.
Very interesting. Thank you.